all here. So 3 weeks ago, I shared some quick updates on threats to the rule of law that you might have missed. One of the things I mentioned is that as part of the lead up to America's 250th anniversary next year, the White House had announced in early August a review of Smithsonian Museum exhibits, quote, to assess tone, historical framing, and alignment with American ideals, end quote. Specifically, the museums were being required to, quote, replace divisive language with unifying and constructive descriptions, end quote. The White House letter explained that this review will, quote, ensure alignment with the president's directive to celebrate American exceptionalism, remove divisive narratives, and restore confidence in our shared cultural institutions. What I said 3 weeks ago was that this was less of a true accounting of the good and the bad and the ugly of real life. It was more of a trophy case of American victories, less about slavery and civil rights struggles, and more about racial harmony. This was all part of an executive order entitled, quote, Restoring Truth and Sanity to American History, end quote. And I predicted 3 weeks ago that we would likely talk about the implications of this in future rallies. Well, 2 days after my speech, on August 19th, our president apparently heard my concerns and raised the stakes. He escalated his campaign to purge cultural institutions of materials that conflict with his political directives, alleging that museums were too focused on highlighting negative aspects of American history, including, quote, how bad slavery was, end quote. In a Truth Social post, President Trump directed his attorneys to conduct a review of museums, comparing the effort to his crackdown on universities and law firms around the country. The Truth Social post said, the Smithsonian is, in all caps, out of control, where everything discussed is how horrible our country is, how bad slavery was, and how unaccomplished the downtrodden have been. Nothing about success, nothing about brightness, nothing about the future, end quote. Now, we have seen in the past few months the January 6 rioters turned from invaders trying to stop an election to pardoned heroes whose songs uplifted rallies. And that got me thinking, if we really are going to try to take a turn away from negative things, like things we shouldn't think about historically, like wars. That's not part of history. Death isn't part of history. We should just think about the gloried, wonderful aspects of American society and everything that's going forward. So it made me think about some other potential exhibits at our museums. And I thought about this, an exhibit about hidden trap sinks foreign invaders headed for America instead of the Titanic. I thought about a whole section on the optimism about 95 years ago or so. The exhibit on optimism could be called Skies Are Clear, Songs of Cheer, echoing FDR's Happy Days Are Here Again, using the song that he used to project hope for better times ahead. Because when we talk about the depression, isn't that depressing? Shouldn't that be scrubbed? Shouldn't it be called the optimism? And we'll just think about the happy songs and the clear skies. I thought about an exhibit from maybe 80 years ago, 84 years ago, saying just as we had to clear tons of old shipyard and make Hawaii a tourist paradise, we're now working on neighborhood reconstruction and beautification in ritzy Gaza. Isn't that more uplifting than bombing of Pearl Harbor? It could be a positive thing for what it did to Hawaii. I thought about one that said, the war we won so bigly that we could leave just in one helicopter instead of all the tragedy about Vietnam. Now, I don't know how you feel about this. I can smile through all of this because it's so silly and so insane. But why wouldn't he do that? And why wouldn't his supporters think, yeah, that's right? There's way too much an assault on truth that we're going to keep talking about all fall and all winter and continuing on. And it's really, it really penetrates everything that we talk about, and it's so important to continue to grapple with. I want to contrast this development, complaining about the negative stuff in history that's portrayed in our museums. I want to contrast that development with the words, not of a president, number 47, not of the 47th president of the United States, but an earlier time, not too long ago, when a president who was not the 47th president of the United States said this. 1 month into his first term, he emerged from a tour of the new Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture, so moved by what he saw that this was his speech. He called it an honor to be the second sitting president to visit the museum. He referenced the experience of a runaway slave who had joined the Union Army. And he quoted Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. as the civil rights icon's niece stood behind him beaming. He said he wished he could have stayed longer. He said, quote, "This tour was a meaningful reminder of why we have to fight bigotry, intolerance, and hatred in all of its very ugly forms." In a video address days after he toured the African American History Museum, he said the museum, quote, "serves as a shining example of African Americans' incredible contributions to our culture, our society, and our history. It also tells of the great struggle for freedom and equality that prevailed against the sins of slavery and the injustice of discrimination." Can anybody guess who that president was? Who? It was Trump, 45.